All right, welcome back to Script Camp. We are here today with a brand new standalone class called Tone, Mood, and Genre. And this is mostly going to be about how it pertains to, these topics pertain to feature writing, but these are also things that can come up no matter what type of narrative writing that you're doing. So whether you're writing a TV pilot or a play or anything else, then these things can all come through. But today we're going to really be looking at what tools that we have to influence and create things like mood and atmosphere in terms of screenwriting specifically. So this is done in a very different way in novels, for instance, and I would check out our novel bootcamp if you have more interest in that type of writing. Okay, so let's take a look at our overview for today. This is going to be in a staged channel, so that means that you have to raise a hand if you want to speak aloud. You can click that little hand icon to raise your hand, and then you'll have to be invited to the stage, and once you're invited, I'll have to click invite or the verify button. You'll have to look for that little green bar that says you've been invited to speak, and you do have to press accept on that one. So we are on Script Camp today, which is our biggest server with almost, I think we're coming up on 5,000 members. We have, or maybe even slightly more than that by now. I may have lost track, but in any case, we have lots of free classes, table reads, script swaps, and writers groups. We are part of Skill Camp, which is a nonprofit that offers free and low-cost classes to learn new skills and reach your life goals. We have some classes that are public, like this one, which stream on everything from YouTube to Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. Although we are based on Discord, that's kind of our home base. So if you're watching from one of those other sites, you can still comment, and we can still usually see those comments a little later. But if you are not on Discord, you can go to our website, and you can sign up and join scriptcamp.net. I'm hearing that the text is a little blurry, so let me just increase the size, so hopefully that amps up the resolution a little bit. You can go to scriptcamp.net and you can sign up for unlimited membership to get access to every class on all the servers, not just Script Camp, but also WordCamp for novel writing, which we mentioned, Film Camp, coding, animation, content, graphic design, language learning, and lots of other skills with over 100 hours of live events and classes every month, exclusive Discord channels, video library access, huge discounts on consultations and proofreads. And if you look in the chat now, you'll see a poll that's been posted where you can click on one of those little blue numbers if you are interested in a particular program, or maybe you have questions about it, then let us know. And you can get that instant access by signing up now. So my name's Connor. I won't do this whole slide because I've done so many events. I think most people know who I am by now, but I teach the features, TV, and novels on Script Camp and WordCamp. I've been a repped screenwriter since 2017, and work mostly in the sort of horror, thriller, and action world, doing mostly rewrites and polishes on horror and thriller movies. And I have a couple of movies that I've set up in Hollywood before. Nothing has been made yet, but things that have been getting attachments. So hopefully at some point one of these most recent things will actually move forward, and I will have some bigger things to announce. But for now, here's my little bio. You can read that if you wish. I have these classes coming up. So on the 31st, that's next week, we will be doing one in this time slot. Right now I'm calling the Victory Lap, but just because not many people know what that is, it's kind of just like fun things to do in the third act. Doctors hate these 5 tricks about the third act. On the 7th, we're starting week 0 on the pilot
Should
program.
we change it to this weird trick, or 5?
Something like that, some clickbait. And we are starting out new pilot bootcamp. That's going to be on the 7th. So week 0 and week 1 of bootcamps are going to be open to everybody. And then if you want to stick around for the whole bootcamp past week 2, then you should definitely sign up and become a supporting member. Get instant access to those exclusive Discord channels and video library access and all those great things. On Saturdays, we're running novel outline bootcamp up until we start the full phase of the 90-day novel course. So the next couple weeks are all just free public classes on WordCamp. On the 25th and 1st, we are going into scenes and chapters and then final outline lab. So that's tomorrow from 12 to 2, we're doing scenes and chapters. And then on the 1st, we are taking a last look at those outlines before we're getting ready to move ahead into the actual writing the book, starting the book, or starting that 90-day program on the 8th, and then moving up ahead into first pages on the 15th. And new session of Feature Bootcamp is, we mentioned, moving into that Sunday slot, so that's going to be Sundays 10 to noon starting on the 14th of next month. You will write a whole movie in 8 weeks from idea all the way to first draft. Okay, these are all free, so I hope you guys stop by. We have lots of other weekly events and meetups and writers groups and labs and workshops, so you can see UI design and Discord bot coding are coming up on CodeCamp. We have advanced labs for both screenwriting and fiction. And the weekly Writers Lab is like a place to bring questions that you have, things that you're wondering about, and up to 5 pages of your script for feedback from me and the rest of the lab. So those are twice a week. Today, Fridays from 12 to 2, and there's another one Saturdays from 4 to 6. Okay, so many dates and times to announce. Always plenty of stuff going on ScriptCamp and all the different SkillCamp servers. So please join. If you've not already joined scriptcamp.net, sign up for that unlimited membership. Let us know in the chat if you are interested in doing that. Okay, so we are talking tone today. We've got some fun little quotes here that I won't read through all of them, but you can just sort of get the idea of what we are talking about. We are talking creating mood and emotion in your stories through a combination of different factors that sum up to this idea of mood and tone, right? So what is tone? What is mood? What are we even talking about here? These are good questions to ask, and so that's what we'll start with today before we move ahead through our this little table of contents. So actually we will start by watching a clip from Bel Air versus Fresh Prince, it's like a sort of weird 2 different shows based on the same premise but in very different tones. You don't see that very much, like that when there's a reboot of a show, it's usually not in a completely different tone. So this is actually kind of a noteworthy and fun thing to examine. We can consider tone by genre and tones that fit very well into certain genres, though there's not any of these strict requirements that say your movie has to have this tone. Ultimately, some genres just kind of want to be certain tones. We can look at comps and logline and the importance of setting those things up and highlighting them accurately in order to build out that clear picture of what it is that you're trying to create. Dialogue, environment, and genre expectations, so talking about things like atmosphere, which we also have an exercise on where we'll be describing certain scenes in terms of the atmosphere we're trying to create. And then we will have some time also to share your project's mood and tone, the nuances of that, and maybe if you have any questions about how can I better communicate or explain that tone or bring that through and make that come out on the page better, then today's a good day to ask those things too. So we will just towards the end, like with most of these, have like an open lab period where we will say what are all of your questions or topics you want to discuss or work on in terms of what you're writing now, hopefully as it connects to this idea of tone, mood, and genre. Okay, so plenty of new stuff, plenty of fun stuff. Let's get going with this basic question of what is tone. So now for our folks watching on the stream, it's going to go quiet because we can't play the audio of this or else it will get, copyright struck off of all of our social media. So you're just going to hear a video, or you're going to see a video with no sound. But for those on the stream, you should be able to hear it okay. And I wonder if, in order to get the sound, maybe we should just start an activity not show, perhaps? Otherwise, I would think I would have to swap it over into sharing my whole screen as opposed to sharing just the window, right? I think that's been the problem before.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, either way could work. Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
You could do that.
All right, so let me just copy and paste this link into, well, I guess I'll bring it up on here, make sure it's muted, and then, yeah, maybe I'll just have this playing while you guys are watching it on the activity. So let me start the activity. Gosh, these things always get so complicated, don't they? How do you start an activity, Nacho?
So there's a little rocket button. Do you want me to start it?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Why am I not seeing it?
Could you post the YouTube link in the chat?
Sure, yeah. I'll just post that in the chat, so if you guys want to watch that, if you're not able to join this and want to watch it on your own. Yeah, where's the rocket ship? I feel like I always see it except when I'm looking for it.
You know, I think there are no activities in the stage
Maybe
channel.
not
I'm
in stage
sorry.
channels. Yeah, actually. Okay, so in that case, let
So
me just, I'll drop the link in the chat. I'll just say, let's just take a minute and watch this, just to have something playing on the stream. I'll play it on here with no sound. But everybody take a moment, watch this trailer for the show called Bel Air, and we'll come back and just, I think it's 3 minutes long total. But just take a watch. Okay, so hopefully everyone's finishing up that video. Let's, all the Will Smith jokes have been made, so there's no need to make any more, I feel. Let's, really quickly, before we have any comments on this one, let's just watch the opening sequence of the original. It's way shorter. It's like 1 minute long. Just so if anyone's not familiar with what the source material is here. So quite a contrast between these two. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, we can stop it there. I didn't think it would go into the show like that. All right. Okay, so pretty big differences here, right? This is the same premise, but one of them is, well, let's ask the room. What do you guys notice about the difference between these two different shows? What do you notice about these different shows? There we go. TJ, go ahead.
Well, I've actually watched the first 2 episodes of Bella when it came to Peacock. So like in the actual show, like in Bel Air, like not Fetch Bella, but the one on Peacock, they actually kind of told the story at the intro, but like do it as like a cold open and made it more dramatic.
More
They had.
dramatic. Go ahead.
So basically, like the whole events at the original intro, but like now are like more dramatic to fit the tone of it, and like it's more modern day, but like it's more dramatic.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of the fight in the original intro opening sequence, and it's played for laughs, basically. We see him, like, spinning around. We see, like, the cop comes over to, like, hassle them, and it's all, like, people are smiling. It's very colorful. It's, and then in the Bel Air reboot, people have there's, like, a gun involved. It looks like a
It's
really
like a
high-stakes
gunfight,
fight.
and like if I were actually involved with that one, I would actually be scared. Like, oh my god, you could have died.
Right, exactly. The stakes are much higher in the dramatic version, or at least they are portrayed as if they seem much higher.
Yeah,
Anything else you noticed that you want to share?
not really.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Let's see, Monica, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that I noticed is more like about the history of television itself as a medium and sort of the idiom of what things were in the early 1990s in the sitcom space versus what television is now, which is much more geared around premium streaming dramas. Like the old school laugh track sitcom is basically a thing of the past. I think there are a couple of them that are still kind of wandering around, but it modernized the tone because people basically don't want to see those like cardboard set shows with laugh tracks anymore. So it changed the tone in order to make it a real story about real people instead of a silly cartoon story that gives you a moral every week. So I think history has a lot to do with the tone change in this one particularly.
Yeah, it's unusual though. Still, like even I totally agree. I'm just thinking that normally if they were to reboot this, they would make it like a single camera comedy, right? Or maybe it would be like The Office or something like that, where we have like that. I guess even that's a little dated now. That sort of mockumentary style. But they would have done a different type of comedy. I would have thought. Like in most cases, they don't swap to the opposite, like a different genre almost. So that's kind of interesting. It almost feels like a parody when you watch it to begin with, because it's sort of taking moments that had serious potential in the original, or taking a backstory that had serious potential, and sort of examining it from that more serious angle. Like the stakes are higher. We watch lives are actually being threatened, right? And storylines that revolve around things like not just the sports championship, but we have drug money that we owe somebody. There's people after him. There's a guy that's getting out of prison that looks like he's going to maybe come try to kill Will or whatever, right? So the idea of completely swapping. Imagine if we did this with something else, right? You could take almost any older comedy and reimagine it dramatically. It's kind of has a novelty to it.
I don't think that Home Improvement would make the shift very gracefully.
No, probably not. God, just imagine like all the old sitcoms just charmed the gritty, dark and gritty. Well, I guess they did Sabrina, didn't they? That sort of is the like equivalent of that, right? The chilling adventures of Sabrina sort of swaps her into a different genre as well. Any other thoughts, Monica?
No, that's really what I wanted to say. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks for your comments. So it's cool, right? Like you can take any premise and any basic idea and approach it in such a way that it creates a different emotional experience. by even with the same sorts of scenes. Parody is the opposite. This is almost like there's not really a word for this yet. I guess a reconstruction maybe, but it's the opposite of a parody, or it's the inverse of a parody. Where, like, with a parody, you would take a serious show and play those same moments and those same beats, but again, you would lower the stakes rather than raising them. And instead of the gun, the cops have a water gun or whatever it is, right? A banana peel instead of a gun. Romy says, "I want the Dark Frasier reboot." That would just be a show about a bunch of alcoholics on Cheers, wouldn't it? Destroying their lives slowly. I see a comment also saying that, or commenting on the fan trailer nature of Bel Air. Bel Air there was a fan trailer that got him this show, basically, if you're wondering. So that was actually the Peacock version, but there was an original trailer. It was only a proof of concept to begin with. Anyway, so you can see, if you make a thing on your own, you make it cool enough, make it good enough, then you can actually this is one of those so rare examples that everybody kind of wants to do. They're like, if I write my Spider-Man fan script good enough, surely they'll make it, right? This is one of those rare examples where the trailer was so well done that, yes, he actually made that happen. I see somebody has also linked us a Dark Frasier reimagining. Thank you for that. So let's talk about the tone and mood differences. Stakes are going to be a fundamental starting point, I think, to look at in terms of tone. How real is the danger? So the level of danger and urgency of the story are going to be really key in understanding tone to begin with. We might ask the question also, what fundamental experience is each interpretation trying to convey? One of them is going to be more tense and suspenseful. It looks like a crime drama, whereas one of them is going to take every opportunity for jokes, and it's going to spin every situation into the funniest possible, have the funniest possible outcomes from those situations, by making sure that nothing ever gets too dramatic and serious, though occasionally Fresh Prince would have a serious episode or like a serious scene here and there, but it was so rare that it became more noteworthy when they had that. Let's look at some other examples of same genre or same subject matter, different tone. Explain the differences and nuances. Let's look at this one here. We have The Road versus Fallout. Same kind of stuff, right? People trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. What's the different approach? And with these questions and activities, you can always, if you're new, you can click on the Classroom channel on the left-hand side of your screen. There's a white word bubble on that says Open Chat, that you can bring up the chat and leave your text comments and answers to questions. You can also raise your hand at any point, though I won't necessarily always call on somebody for every slide. You can raise a hand if you'd like to weigh in. Let's see. Merrickson says the aesthetic of cool is different between these two. Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. That sort of idea of rule of cool and what's allowed to be funny or what's allowed to be cool are very different in different tones, or can do a lot to crafting a different tone. You have this, the Brotherhood of Steel, these guys in this awesome power armor that have like guns that fold out of their arms and stuff like this. It's just a much more sort of fun approach to the same subject matter as The Road, which is about essentially filthy scavengers trying to find, murder each other for a can of beans on the side of the road. It's allowed to be fun in a different way. Monica tells us the color palette. Yeah, completely different color palette that we can see between these two, and a color palette that also reflects that different approach to the style, right? One of them is all washed out and gray and painted in like chalk and ash, like a burned out building, whereas Fallout looks like a comic book from the 1950s. You've got these bright blues and explosions right there on the cover, which kind of give you this, it's based on a video game, and it has a little bit of that feel, right? It's allowed to be more fun. Foster tells us, yeah, bright and poppy color, while The Road is much more gray. And we see a lot of differences in terms of post-apocalypse and the zombie genres as well, which we've seen a lot of variation in terms of, we have everything from your 28 Days Later all the way up to your Zombieland or your Shaun of the Dead on the other side. Some are pitch black and nihilistic, brutally violent and unrelenting and tragic, whereas some are basically comedies. I have some other examples here too. What do you guys think of this? Interstellar versus Guardians of the Galaxy? Heat versus Ocean's 11, or The Dark Knight versus The Incredibles? Feel free to raise a hand and weigh in on one of those if you have an opinion on what is the specific tone difference between those two, and how do you know? What builds out that overall picture? More than just the cinematography, more than just the look of it. How are the rules different between those different stories? Luke says, what are the choices? Well, they're on the screen. I'm just going to call on Luke so he has to choose one.
All I see is Fallout and The Road still.
Do you see the text below it?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Interstellar versus Guardians of the Galaxy, Heat versus Ocean's 11, or Dark Knight versus Incredibles. Okay. Let's go with the first one, Interstellar versus Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, take it away.
I guess Interstellar tries to sort of, at least the first half does, tries to use real science, and it's grounded in the real world. Guardians of the Galaxy is grounded in a cartoon world with a space raccoon. What else? Interstellar is about like, I don't know. I guess they both have sort of deep emotional arcs for the characters, but they're approached in very different ways. And Interstellar is like gritty and dark and bleak and sort of I don't know, cold compared to Guardians of the Galaxy, which is more warm and inviting, and there's recognizable music. There's I don't know, it's more fun. The fun is definitely a part of it.
There's almost like a cozy quality to Guardians of the Galaxy in terms of like you want to feel like you're kind of on this crew, like having an adventure with this team, and they're funny. They make jokes with each other. They're always riffing on each other, and like they have quirky personalities. I think we want to live in one of these worlds, and we don't really want to live in the other one. Would you agree?
I agree. Also, Interstellar is asking sort of like deep, fundamental questions, and Guardians of the Galaxy is just asking a little bit more lighthearted kinds of questions.
Yeah. So you might ask a question like, when are we allowed to laugh in this story? And there's maybe like a couple chuckles per Christopher Nolan movie, but there's not that many. And then, as opposed to Guardians, right, where it's basically an action comedy. Or we could ask the question, when are you allowed to cry? And there are a couple sad moments throughout the Guardians movies, but I think that scarcity makes them feel like more of a big deal when they happen, because in a tone that is overall comedic, the serious moments will stand out more, just like the opposite, right? Like all the kind of moments of humorous banter on the ship in Interstellar between Cooper and Tars, for instance, they stand out more and they hit a little harder because they are so rare and they don't sort of suffuse the entire narrative. What do you think?
Right, and that's why the dramatic moments in Guardians of the Galaxy hit harder, because they don't suffuse the entire narrative. They're just the,
right,
I don't know, seasoning sprinkled throughout.
And also, we sort of access it through, in Interstellar, the emotionality is mostly attached to the main character, whereas in I've only seen the first Guardians, by the way, but the emotional kind of like motivation of the main character is pretty much taken care of in just the cold open. It's like, yeah, he lost his mom. He's sad about that. Anyway, he goes off on this space adventure, and more of the emotional weight of the story is carried on Rocky Raccoon's shoulders. So he,
right.
What we would consider to sort of be like the heart or the emotional center of a comedic story may not necessarily, or on any story, but in this case, they don't necessarily fall on the main hero, and so that kind of relegates the sadness to a subplot to some extent. I'm sure the later ones are different because they involve, I think, Quill finding his father and stuff like that. So
yeah,
maybe it does bring the emotional center back to him a little bit. But at least in the first one, which I have seen, then we are really asked to have more sympathy for Rocket Raccoon and to kind of invest in his journey just as much, but in that kind of, in the way that we're allowed to be sad. So I think that's how you can build out that sense of an emotional center to your story. You would always ask, well, who are we allowed to feel great sympathy or sadness for? If you even look at some cartoons that have sort of similar subject matter, think in terms of like The Simpsons versus Family Guy. What's the difference between the emotionality in those two series, Luke?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you.
Well, so like The Simpsons, for instance, has certain characters that I would call a really solid emotional and moral core to them. Think Lisa, for instance, at the real heart of it. But also just like the center family has a lot of those really kind of dynamics that you feel like this is overall kind of the point of the show. Like this is the lesson that the characters have learned. This is we're doing things beyond just joke after joke after joke in The Simpsons. Especially, and this obviously comes in waxes and wanes on a season by season basis, but in Family Guy there's not really that same sense of emotional core.
Okay.
Unless you think otherwise, feel free to. I mean, I haven't watched that much Family Guy. Maybe they do have that develops later on.
I think in Family Guy, you're meant to sort of hate them all in different ways. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia kind of cast.
Yeah, again, Always Sunny, a show that does not really have that same sense of emotional anchor that keeps us like rooting for someone, and we want someone to win and succeed. We're sort of rooting for everyone to fail because they're all horrible people, and that is a very just different way of approaching that same idea of comedic ensemble. Thanks for that, Luke. Let's have TJ. Go ahead, TJ. Which one of these do you want to compare?
I bring up like Family Guy because like there is an episode called Life of Brian, and that is like the big emotional episode of the show because in that episode they made a huge deal in the promotion. I was like, oh, one character gonna die, and it's Brian, and they made his death so gothic bad, like it just feels off for like a normal Family Guy, oh, Family Guy is like these cutaway gaps, and then his life of Brian still normal Family Guy, but then Brian looked out, Brian get hit by a car, dies, and then a couple episodes later he comes back to life.
Yeah, that can be a problem if you sort of undercut the emotional moments that you create by sort of redoing the continuity, or you overwrite the continuity. It feels like then, why did it matter? Like, why did you ask the audience to invest in that storyline if you're going to just erase it afterwards?
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments. So, when we're talking about tone in a story, especially in a screenplay, we're talking about a combination of different things. In just these first couple slides, we've been examining the idea of stakes. So the level of stakes and the investment in the urgency of the character's urgency to achieve or to avoid those stakes, that's going to be a key component of tone. So kind of like, how worried does the audience feel? Think, again, Interstellar versus Guardians. Do we feel really worried in Guardians that the main team will die and fail and the galaxy will be destroyed? Are we actually concerned that that's going to happen? I wouldn't say we really are in the Marvel kind of tone. In Marvel, it's a huge digression when the characters actually lose, which is why it's such a big moment at the end of that second Endgame movie, the second Avengers movie, when they're like, oh wait, that was so weird, we just lost? What's happening? Like, it's we expect the good guys to win and for good to prevail and for the lesson to be learned in the kind of mainstream popcorn comic book genre, right? But different genres have very different expectations of that. You can think of something like the world of grimdark fantasy versus the world of heroic fantasy. Heroic fantasy being, the hero's a good person that's fighting against injustice. Like Superman is a very sort of like heroic kind of character, right? He's fighting for humans because he believes in humanity and because he thinks that people can always make the right choice and that he believes in forgiveness. He's this almost like Jesus-like figure of goodness, right? And then we have other variants with that as well. In the world of fantasy, we specifically do talk about grimdark, but it extends beyond fantasy as well. Grimdark being a tone where it's kind of the opposite of that. Characters are fundamentally selfish, and if there's any that aren't, they often pay the price for not being as nasty as everyone around them. Think of like Lord of the Rings, but none of the characters really are trying to destroy the ring. They're all secretly scheming to get it for themselves. Well, I guess that's actually already part of the story to some extent, but like Sam strangles Frodo before they leave Bag End. He steals the ring and ends up on a quest that has him team up with Gollum, and then they get ambushed and killed by Aragorn. Like, he eats the ring for himself, and then Aragorn is driven insane and becomes a monster. Like, that's the kind of grimdark approach to that same type of story, where you're telling you're creating a very different kind of dramatic argument. Obviously, you would not want to cast Lord of the Rings in those grimdark kind of hues and tones because it's a story about those, the average, the quiet determination of average people being the strongest way to fight against evil. If clearly that doesn't work, then you're not building that dramatic argument. If average people are not able to make a difference, and it's only through randomness and chance that good occasionally wins, or there is no good at all, and good is a foolish concept, that if you even attempt to follow, then you will be punished mercilessly for it. That's more of the grimdark approach on that same type of story. So the question of the kind of outlook or worldview of both the characters and the events themselves, like, are the characters, quote, punished for doing the right thing? That leads to that sort of much darker or grimdark adjacent storytelling style, whereas we have other, like, for instance, when I was watching Stranger Things season 2, the character Dustin finds like a little baby monster, basically, and it's sort of like a little version of the monsters they've been fighting, and he raises it, and like all the rest of his team doesn't like it. They think it's gross or scary, but he has a name for it. He feeds it and everything like that. And then later on, lo and behold, guess what? Even though he lets it go, at some point they run into it in a cavern and it's about to attack them. And then he's like, "Oh wait, it's you. I raised you. Hey little guy, it's me." And it lets them go by. He's like, "Thanks, buddy." And I kind of knew that would happen. Why? Because in a show like Stranger Things, the world would never punish a character for having good intentions and showing for loving, for like, people don't get punished for loving in that same exact way. And whereas you can take an example like Game of Thrones, or House of the Dragon, right? Where imagine, like, okay, minor spoilers for episode 10 of the show that came on several years ago. The moment that Rhaenyra is giving this big speech to her 2 sons, and she's like, "I cannot lose you two. You're the most important people to me in the entire world. You have to accomplish this mission." I was like, okay, they're screwed. How did I know that? Because the world that we're in punishes people in the most viscerally emotional ways possible. And it's like that kind of thing where the cop is like, I'm retiring in 2 weeks. I got 2 weeks left until retirement. And we know in the world of where that cliche originated from, that was used as emotional ammunition. It's not used as like a way to get us to like that character more. It's going to be used to sucker punch us and say it's even sadder that cop died because he was just 2 weeks away from retirement. Merrickson in the chat says fans would have lost their shit if Dustin was killed by the creature he raised. Yeah, exactly. Because we come to expect that this is a world where empathy is like the good guy's key trait. There is a brief moment in the first episode where we do kind of challenge this. And this is where that nice diner owner takes an 11 for a minute, and then he gets murdered by the bad guys right off the bat. That's actually rare for that kind of thing to happen in that show, but that does build the stakes a little bit higher off the bat. But that does not persist all throughout. Most of the time, when good people make the hard choice and try their best to do the right thing, they will be rewarded for that by at least surviving, which is why we also see people like Steve, who is, like, I guess you could say he's kind of a fan favorite character. Maybe that gives him some level of plot armor too. But also he reforms himself throughout the first season, and like you can see, although maybe they were originally building towards killing him towards the end, that he is sort of being rewarded for his choices. So like, and for becoming better and for reforming. So you can see how stakes and the overall outlook or worldview of any story can do a lot towards building the sense of what's possible and what's deserved and who's got it coming, and questions like that. We have things like visuals, which, although we are writing for a visual medium, scripts are not a visual medium, which is that weird spot because we're like describing a visual medium that your script can't actually use pictures. But the look and the feel of things does a lot to create that sense of tone as well. Everything from, that basic question of, are the scenes light or dark? Because dark equals scary and light equals not scary. That's not always the exact dichotomy there, but you can see how we can use things like the atmosphere of a scene to make the audience start to feel spooked or scared, or maybe we want to use the atmosphere to make them feel carefree and lighthearted, like we're having like a beach party scene or something. Like, what's that volleyball sequence in Top Gun, right? There's nothing spooky or scary about that sequence unless you're spooked out or scared by very famous actors doing very cringy handshakes and stuff like that with each other. Mario, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do agree with your tone definition, but I just want to like add on to it, which is I think tone and genre are almost synonymous, because tone in another word is promise, and genre is also promise. Because you're when a person reads, it's like McDonald's. I've been told that it's like McDonald's. Like McDonald's is successful because everywhere across the world they meet expectations. Like a burger at a Russian McDonald's tastes the same as a burger in an American, right?
Mhm.
And so when I want more of the same, like I really want more of the same, right? And if your tone at the very early beginning, because you have to set the tone early, you can hear that term, right? Set the tone early. That means when I, who likes happy endings, sees that you kill, like you push Bran off the tower, oh, I know this is not for me. I won't hate you. But if I read it and you like do bad stuff at the end, but you don't promise the tone to me, even if the book is written by like God or something, right? An expert, right? I will still not like it, no matter how well written it. So that's the importance of it: promise and expectations, and McDonald's.
And McDonald's, yes, good point. So yeah, I definitely agree. I wouldn't say they're synonymous just because we looked at how genre can be approached with different tones, but they're very linked. They are very connected, and in terms of both, they are different ways of setting expectations, and that's why it's so important. We always say set the tone within and create that kind of mini version of the emotional experience of the story within the first scene, usually, but within the first couple scenes. That's where we're doing a lot of that calibration of audience expectations. Thank you for those thoughts. So, how do we achieve the tone we want? I'm going to come back to this one when we ask the question, list 2 or 3 movies with a tone similar to what you're going for. Let's do some more slides before we do more volunteer moments or activities, though. So, we have, what expectations will the reader have based on your chosen genre? We could ask these questions. Are you teaching the reader in the first few pages how to read the script and the sorts of things to expect or to be excited for? Do your descriptions evoke the right genre-specific mood in the reader? So there are moments that you can always create any mood within any genre, and some of the best filmmakers actually play every note on the keyboard. If you watch Spielberg or people like this, then they will find the ways that you can have humorous, lighthearted moments, really serious moments, really scary moments in everything he does. But different genres have different moods and tones that they rely on more, I would say. We're going to go more into this in a moment, but think of how the dialogue setting and character choices can fit in your genre and tone, and you should really read a lot of scripts in your genre and analyze the ones with that same tone that you're trying to create. I think one of the big questions we ask early on is the story funny or serious? So what are we allowed to, we asked it in a different way earlier, what are we allowed to laugh at versus what are we allowed to cry at? Are we allowed to laugh or cry at anything? In what ways or parts is it allowed to be one way or the other? And some stories have a lot of nuance there, or very specific and complicated combinations of those tones, where there are, for instance, I have a Martin McDonagh movie in the background here. He doesn't really distinguish between a funny scene versus a serious scene. It's almost like every scene is both. So it's that kind of tragic comedy, dark comedy kind of thing, where we are allowed to laugh and cry at the same moments sometimes, which is tricky to pull off. You might ask a question like, in movies with a tone similar to your project, how does the dialogue convey that? Let's think of like Six Shooter by Martin McDonagh, the short film that he won an Oscar for in 2004. The main character is played by Brendan Gleeson, whom we see back here, who just has the worst luck in any McDonagh story. He's just going to have something horrible happen to him, doesn't he? But in any case, his wife has been murdered, and he's at the doctor, or at the, I guess, talking to the coroner, or I think it's either doctor or coroner, and at the beginning, the dialogue kind of tells us what kind of world and worldview of story we're in, what kind of mood we're creating, because the doctor's like, I'm afraid your wife's been shot. Her head's been shot clean off. And Brendan Gleeson's like, oh, is she all right? And the doctor's like, just takes him in and is like, no, she's not all right. Her head's been shot clean off. Like, you almost have to laugh at it because just like it's so messed up. The character asking, is she okay, after he says she's been shot, like that's so dark. But that sort of is setting in, and that's like one of the first couple scenes. That's telling us, oh, this is going to be a story where we are allowed to laugh not only at serious moments, but at the darkest possible subject matter, which the rest of the story then does again and again in different ways. And McDonagh is full of scenes and moments like that. does the dialogue fit in the unique world of the story? So in a movie that was purely serious, you may not have wanted that character to have that exact line of questioning. Is she all right? Can I go see her? No, she was like actually shot, right? That is almost a little absurd in its own way. Does your story have lots of jokes and quips and witty back and forth? Do your characters interrupt and speak over each other, or are they given a lot of room to perfectly form their thoughts? That'll create more of a sort of theatrical or stylized tone if the characters are always speaking in these perfectly constructed sentences. Like, go back and watch a lot of sort of Victorian era adaptations of stories like Sense and Sensibility or Emma or things like that, and you'll see a much more stylized approach to reality where everybody not only can phrase things perfectly, but they can access their inner life and their inner thoughts in a much clearer way than people really can. And that was just part of the sort of cultural conceit of Victorian era fiction that was just sort of built into it. So in the movie adaptations of those, we do carry that over in a lot of them. There are some that play the dialogue a little more realistically, but a lot of the time they're trying to emulate the genre conventions of the stories that they're based on, which allow for the characters to speak in more grandiose and eloquent ways to convey their inner thoughts, because the stories are often about characters that are challenging society or espousing their views on how people should live and be. And that requires them to, or seems to require them to, be able to make these big long speeches and have these more eloquent back and forths. So that's going to lead to this, this philosophical kind of tone, or maybe your story has more of a satirical edge to it, or something like this that requires your characters to go on monologues. Think of an Adam McKay movie, or something like this, like Don't Look Up, or The Big Short, where the characters break the fourth wall, or they have a long speech about something, and some issue that clearly is at the core of the story and its dramatic argument. You could ask, is my story allowed to do that, or do we purely have to stick in the moment and be realist? Let's think of these different filmmakers and let's compare the tone of not just individual movies, but of their overall canon of work. We have Wes Anderson, Robert Eggers, and then we have the Zuckers down here, which would be things like Airplane, Naked Gun. I'm actually not sure what the one on the left of that example is here, but you can think of like the sort of big spoof movies like Hot Shots from the 80s and 90s. Okay, so let's go ahead, Dakota. Oh, come back. There you are.
Hello. So there's so much.
There's a lot here. Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions at the bottom. Maybe you can start with that, but feel free to take it wherever you want.
Sure. So Wes Anderson, I'll just start from left to right because it's how we read.
Sure.
So Wes Anderson's tone can be described very simply as whimsical. He deals a lot with coming of age, almost exclusively. So even his color palette informs the tone. Generally, they're very light pastels. Everything is centered, meaning that it's very focused on what is in front of you. There's a lot of different. He allows his characters to go on, these really long like monologues as if they are lecturing you about a particular lesson, which is something that coming of age typically tends to do, especially in literature. So Wes Anderson is very much in the whimsy, but whimsy morality is kind of what I'm going for. And then the left one there is Ruthless People from 1986, by the way. In terms of the Zuckers, they are, the tone is very, it's a little bit heavier. It can be dark comedy, depends on the film, right? Airplane is kind of different from Naked Gun, for example. But they all kind of are the through line of everything is absurd. You're allowed to laugh at basically everything and anything. There's nothing that is off limits because they basically do everything that is off limits at the time. They really did push a lot of the rating systems at the time. And then, of course, when we go over to Eggers, he's very dark and moody and just very grim, and a lot of that is through how he composes his characters. They're very long tirades about the state of the world. They're almost noirs in a way, like even though he does a lot of different genres. His characters go on, especially in the Lighthouse, just very long monologues about look at how depressed I am. Philosophical questions. You're not really supposed to laugh at this. This is the inward uncomfortable, like, just you don't feel good watching these movies. At least I don't. So I don't know if that particularly answers any question that you had, but that's kind of like, because I come from graphic design, so a lot of when I know that tone is very different in different fields, but tone to a graphic designer is often about what is it communicating visually, like in a literal sense, like what does it look like? So as opposed to what it sounds like on the page. But hopefully that's kind of in the direction you're going for. I know what you're trying to say. I'm just trying to be succinct with it. Yeah, mise en scène. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. And so these are all very stylized filmmakers. All these,
Yep.
none of these are realistic types of stories that we're seeing behind us, right? But they're unrealistic in different ways, because Wes Anderson has this very sort of theatrical, almost like storybook kind of look and feel to his worlds and composition and characters. It feels like it could be on stage, or it could be in a picture book or something like that, right? Whereas Eggers is usually harkening back to older film styles, so like German Expressionism, for instance, in terms of the Lighthouse, or like what is it, early 20th century filmmaking that he has a lot of very direct parallels to, and is trying deliberately to evoke that same feeling of antiquity, I guess you would say, antiquatedness.
French noir, the new wave, for sure. Very good Dard.
Right, exactly. And whereas the Naked Guns and the Airplanes of the world, I would say the cinematography is not really trying to show off. It's more about highlighting the jokes, and the everything is either a setup or a punchline or connecting us to the next setup. And so in terms of visuals, everything is pretty just bright and clear. We're not trying to get in the have the cinematography get in the way of the delivery of as many jokes per page as we can get.
Exactly. Yeah, Airplane is very much just, basically on one set for 97% of the movie. So it really is just, here, let me just show as much as possible.
Yeah, and you can look at even modern comedies, or like more recent feature comedies, have had this sort of accusation or this idea that they don't really try with cinematography anymore. They just go for coverage. Coverage in this case meaning the angles that you were shooting the scenes from that allow you to cut back and forth between those different characters. And for a lot of, let's say, late 2000s or the last 20 years of comedy movies, they rely a little too heavily on, let's just roll and do a bunch of takes and improv and find what works and stitch it together. So to that end, they can't really use too complicated cinematography to achieve that goal. So they don't really show off. They aren't really trying as hard in terms of like visual style and creativeness to the style. It's about almost getting out of the way rather than highlighting drawing attention to itself.
Absolutely. Hallmark movies do the exact same thing as well.
Right, yeah, just flat coverage, basically.
Yeah,
straight
flat, wearing coverage. Yeah. Follow the 180-degree rule, that's it. That's all they do.
And soap operas too, just due to like the nature of the shooting, you almost like it would waste too much of their time to try to make the cinematography stand out. So they don't rely on cinematography to create the tone and the mood.
Right.
There was I really liked, in terms of recent comedies in the last 10 years that I thought had amazing cinematography. I'll list you two of them. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which is a coming-of-age dramedy with cinematography by Chung Hoon Chung. And then we have Yesterday by Danny Boyle, which has fantastic cinematography all throughout. So if you're looking for comedies that actually do really try, and also Edgar Wright stuff, obviously, so things like Shaun of the Dead and things like this that go out of their way to use the cinematography as part of the character of the story.
Also, I recommend See How They Run as well, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a comedy mystery.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Fantastic cinematography there. The color grading is just beautiful in that.
Yeah, I agree. That one, the whole thing sort of feels like a murder mystery play, which I guess it's all about plays in the first place. It's, you know, centered on a theatrical production, so it feels very crisp and colorful and clean. It's just, it looks so good. Yeah.
Wonderful. Awesome. Sweet.
Thank you for that. All right. So, think of. So I guess if we're trying to nail down the main things that create tone, what we have so far is we have stakes and level of urgency for the main characters. We have what the audience feels as they come away from the experience or as they're watching it. So they get how they feel from a combination of what's happening on screen versus how it looks, the music and choices like that. We have dialogue, which sort of ties into this idea of humor or lack thereof. What's allowed to be funny? Are the characters making jokes? And then there's also this weird kind of expectation as well that if we're in a traditional comedy and characters are making jokes, the other characters don't acknowledge that jokes are happening. They're not laughing at it because they don't think it's funny. But you can create a very different type of story if, like, for instance, you're doing a movie about a comedian or something like that, where we do recognize and acknowledge the jokes and the characters do laugh at the things that the other ones are saying. It changes the agreement with the audience a little bit, though. In movies with tone similar to your project, you might ask the question, how does dialogue convey this tone? Are characters speaking in a very constructed way or a very off-the-cuff impromptu way? Is it actually improv? Does the dialogue style fit within that unique world of the story? Is there lots of quips? Oh, we already asked a couple of these questions about the interrupting in the speeches and things like this. But so you can also ask questions like, do the characters say what they want? Do the characters hide their intentions, or do they say what's on their mind? For instance, think of Yorgos Lanthimos movies. Characters, most of the time, they don't really have a filter. They kind of just say exactly what they are thinking, or they don't really have the same sense of shame or embarrassment that we do. It seems like a lot of characters will just admit dark or gross secrets about themselves like it's almost nothing, right? And that creates a world like that goes out to build a world where people just behave a little bit differently. This is a constructed world. This is not exactly our reality. Even if a Yorgos Lanthimos movie looks like it takes place in reality, it doesn't actually. It's an illusion. Obviously, no movie's really happening. We could ask questions like, does the writer use a voiceover narration? And how can that influence the tone too? Such as to paint a picture of a dark or nihilistic world in the case of something like a noir detective. Or maybe a character that makes jokes about things, makes light of everything, like in the British sitcom Creepshow, where we have the characters that are able to comment and speak the voice, their thoughts in the moment. And we get a lot of jokes and humor from that, as opposed to, this detective commentary. We could ask, does the voiceover reveal the protagonist's naive and quirky view of the world, or their interpretation of events? You could have a really serious and dark story from the point of view of a character that doesn't realize that it's really dark. Someone like Deadpool, I think, exists in a world like that, where we're in a world of lots of violence and high stakes, but the character approaches it in such a glib way that we can kind of have a little more fun with it and sort of just enjoy the theatrics of what we're watching rather than worrying about, is Deadpool going to die in this one? Is the world really going to be destroyed? Environment. So the environment does a lot towards creating atmosphere. Details can create tone as well. We might ask how the world itself, the settings, help communicate tone and mood. The easy examples of this are things like a scary movie, where we're like, how do we make just the environment itself match and amplify the tone that we're going for? Well, darkness and fog and things like this that obscure the environment and that don't show as much to us, they are just tied into our natural inclination as humans to be worried of the dark. We can't see what's hiding in it, so we are going to be more afraid of it, right? So the atmosphere can come down to the set choices, the decoration, the details that you decide to linger on or focus on. If you're writing a Western, for instance, and a guy gets shot and he goes, and falls off a building and does a flip and lands in a hay bale, that's going to be a very different feeling from if a character gets shot and they, gore flies over the walls and you describe the brain matter as it congeals on the wallpaper and things like that. You see how you can, by picking to emphasize certain details, you create a different type of story world. And that goes for your screenwriting, even though you don't feel like that would necessarily communicate, or that would always read. Because how those certain things are shot specifically are going to be up to the director, but you are trying to create that sense in the director that they get what the tone of this world is. So even if they do make different choices, then they can be informed by the overall portrait of the story that you crafted in just the visuals, or because we are in a non-visual medium, your description of the visuals, I guess I would say. Think of the things that distinguish your environment from others like it that we've seen. We've all seen a diner before. Do you have to write, it's an average diner? There's black and white tile on the floor and neon lighting. There's milkshakes at the bar. Do you really need all that? Or can you focus on what actually makes it distinct? Think of, if we go into a diner, is there a fly that buzzes around the cake tin? Like, is that the kind of thing that you can add that almost unsettling feeling with? When we come in, is there a clock that ticks on the wall very loudly, and it's the only thing you can hear in that room, and it sort of seems to fill the silence? You can communicate different things about your environment by just picking different things to amplify and to bring to the forefront. Think, is this a dark and angry world? Is this a quirky and funny world? We are looking to fill the script with specificities and nuances that give it that quality that we are looking for. Or think, if we're trying to make it feel like this is a world that has existed before the story began and will continue to exist after the story concludes, how can we make it feel like it's been lived in? In terms of what's that? I forget the name of that. I think it's Kitsurugi, perhaps, is the name of this Japanese art where you fix things with like a liquid. Kitsurugi, thank you. You fill things like cracks in pottery with gold, for instance, so as not to conceal the fractures in them, but to highlight the beauty in them. Think of, how does that apply to your world? For instance, you have your characters are in a spaceship that's been in a million battles. You might think, oh, there's that one door that always falls off its hinges, right? Or there's that one, there might be a door that just has caution tape over it that says, airlock breached, do not enter. We never need to reference it or see it, but even that fact that that's there, we can sort of see the bruises that things have left upon your world. You might think of the scuff marks on the floor and like the desire paths in a public park. Like, the more that people walk over a certain place, the more they're going to wear the grass down. Like, just think of all the people that have lived and interacted with this space before we come to see it. And how can we use those details to make it feel like it really exists somewhere, like it feels like it's behaving in a realistic way that we would expect it to. And you can pick different details in the environment within different genres to help amplify that mood as well. Think of like Blue Velvet. It's that suburban crime thriller type of genre, but the clues that the characters use to get from scene to scene are things like a severed ear covered in ants, or the place we investigate is like this seedy apartment building in the middle of a logging town. The villain uses an oxygen mask everywhere he goes, and everything feels just a little bit otherworldly. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is a similar sort of thing. It's a vampire movie, but that has a really artistic approach to it, I guess you could say. We have, skateboarding vampires and mimes dancing with balloons, and all over it really has this more of an art house kind of sensibility to it. So you just really know your world and let it speak through the screenplay, and from everything from the sounds and the visuals, the way that characters behave, the things that they say, the things that we are allowed to have them say, the things that we're allowed to laugh at, or the things that we are allowed to cry at. All of that will build out the sense of what kind of story are we in and what kind of experience are we getting. These things are tied to genre, but not exactly the same. So different genres can be approached with different nuances of tone. And we have a couple examples here. I just used the pictures from an earlier class. But we could ask, for instance, like, what is the general expectation of the tone in these different genres? What are the rules? And how are they different? Anybody want to weigh in? This might be kind of a tricky one. Let's get anybody who has not commented yet want to raise a hand. A new speaker. Luke says he did this last time. Yep. Mario, have you spoken yet? I think you had a question, but you didn't do an activity. Go ahead. Or you had a comment earlier. I think your mic is muted.
Yeah. So I've recently read a craft book on romance and how to write it, right?
Great.
And so I've spoken before. It's just that like genre expectations, the subgenre of romance. There's like 30 subgenres of romance and different subgenre expectations, and some of it is really out there, and it's specific to fetishes, in my opinion, right? But
Okay.
I haven't written a romance, which is why I was like reading a craft book to kind of understand, the market, not to write as my main genre, but to like incorporate it into the stuff that I read and see what they like. And
Okay.
from what I understand, it's very fetish based.
Whoa, no, I do not think romance is a super fetish. I'm not sure where you're getting that. Was that?
That's why I didn't want to say anything.
What?
But from what I read from that craft book, it was like all fetish, like pregnant, abusing space, spaceship, spaceship alien that abducts you and then impregnates you, which is an actual book.
I think you're reading
It's
about
called,
erotica.
Ice Planet Barbarians.
Okay, so
And
erotica
is a specific.
Go ahead.
Expectation. All that I just said is that every one of them was an expectation that she combined together.
Okay, but so erotica is a subgenre of romance. So we could say that is definitely we have a different expectation of the graphicness of the sex on screen, essentially. That's part of it for sure. Let's talk more about in terms of tone and mood, though. So like, what are we feeling watching a romance?
I'm gonna break out of here because like I'm like way out of my comfort zone because I have no idea.
Okay. Do you want to just pick a different genre then?
Sure. Action
Okay.
is great.
All right.
Action is great. Okay, so this I know a lot because it's a love letter to Hong Kong films. Chad Stahelski specifically said that when directors do action scenes, they give it to their B unit director and they don't put any effort into it. Whereas action scenes, if you listen to Donnie Yen and all the greats, they treat every action, every move as almost as a director, like Scorsese would. There's weight, camera shifts, like so when you like punch someone, you shake it a little to emphasize the weight of it, and then there's a fallback, a rising crescendo action. There's like a whole climax. This in fact, the entire story can be boiled into the kung fu moves. It's not just hit, but there's like a down movement and a rising action. It's very very specific, and Hong Kong movies are so great is because they know this. And in fact, this John Wick is probably the best Hong Kong Asian film so far in the history, I think, because it's such a student of it. That's it.
Okay, but let's talk about tone and mood. So, what are you feeling watching these movies? Let's just pick John Wick to begin with. What do you feel when you watch John Wick? Oh, he left the stage. Okay, I see another hand raise. Go ahead, Bronze.
Oh, yes. So when it comes to action, usually when I think of a lot of some of my favorite like action film franchises, John Wick was just mentioned, Fast and Furious has become like a guilty pleasure of mine as well. But whenever I think of those franchises, I usually think of very over the top set pieces, a lot of heavy how do I put it? A lot of like very like simple to follow plots with a lot of like very sort of like cool characters, I guess you could say, that are sort of like leading the charge against like whatever their enemies are, or whatever like the antagonistic force is supposed to be, as they sort of like mow down like waves upon waves of all of these like security guards or bodyguards that are out to try to like stop them. Um, I feel like the tone of a lot of action movies is very fast paced, is very like snappy, I guess you could say, and really relies a lot on really a lot of like style and spectacle a lot of the time to keep the viewer's attention.
Okay, and what does it make you feel when you're watching that?
It makes it feels like an adrenaline rush, to be honest. I'd almost describe it as like sort of going on a roller coaster for the first time. Like you're hit with just like a wave of like adrenaline just watching like John Wick like take down like waves upon waves of enemies in any of the scenes from his movies. Or any of the chase scenes from like the Fast and Furious movies. There's always like a rush of adrenaline that you feel just from watching all of these sequences happen back to back.
Right.
And it really makes you feel sort of energized.
Energized, that's good. So, and especially, you mentioned having simple plots does help with this sort of thing because we typically are going to prefer, or audiences are, in terms of expectations, we're looking for a heroic character that is doing the right thing through violence. So that allows us to really root for them and feel like we want them to win and want them to succeed. Whereas if John Wick was doing war crimes, you know, if John Wick was just shooting random people, for instance, we wouldn't really be rooting for it in the same way, even if it was the same amount of action. So I think that there's this expectation that we have it sort of falls into what's called the heroic bloodshed subgenre, where we have somebody that is clearly good fighting against enemies that are, I mean, John Wick is not like clearly good, but for the purposes of the movie, we never see him do anything that bad. A character that is clearly good fighting against enemies that are clearly evil, and so that thereby any level of visceral violence is allowed, and you're sort of allowed to enjoy that violence in terms of rooting for the character, and like it's a sports game, right? You're allowed to root for the home team against the enemy team because we've set up that we really want the home team to win and we really want the enemy team to lose.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, nice. Thank you for getting to the kind of like adrenaline rush that is at the core of this. I think that's a big part of the mood that these are trying to create, is a sort of a frantic mood, a mood that increases the urgency not in just the characters but the viewer too. And as the urgency of the characters goes up, we're leaning in more. We are getting more frantic along with them because the odds are getting harder and harder. Any other thoughts on that?
No. I think I've said my piece. But yeah, I think when it comes to action, the action genre too, I think it also just helps. It also just helps that a lot. Not only are a lot of like the plots simple, but generally like a lot of like the dialogue is pretty straightforward too. Like there are action and comedy do have some sort of like they do have some sort of like I guess sort of shared DNA where you do have a lot of like you do see a lot of action movie heroes like quipping and joking around from time to time, especially when it comes to just like one-liners.
Right.
But generally speaking, like I think like that frantic like tone you were just talking about is definitely more catered to action than comedy most of the time.
Definitely, yeah, for sure. Because we need setups and punch. Like with comedy, you need breathing room a little bit more than you need with action. Whereas with action, you kind of it can be really frantic for several sequences in a row in a movie. We do need downtime as well, but the downtime just works a little differently. And yeah, we're allowed to laugh at certain things. We're allowed to laugh at in different movies that have different levels of, like John Wick, for instance. Are we allowed to laugh at anything? Basically, no. There's almost nothing funny in them. But then again, we have your Ryan Reynolds genre, let's just say, where what do we laugh at? Pretty much anything. Like you can smirk, you have a quip for everything, you got a joke for every situation. We aren't worried in the same way because the urgency isn't as high.
Yeah. Yeah. I also I also do also sort of think of movies like The Incredibles, where the mix between like action and comedy is mostly pretty even. So like for every like big like action scene or fight scene, you do have like moments of downtime where the characters are just like talking to each other and like making like the occasional like joke or like quip as well.
Right. That is true. We do have downtime and we do have those humorous moments, but they will feel often. If we're not in the action comedy world, then we sort of draw these from the character moments, and they should feel a little more organic. Thank you for these thoughts. Okay, I'm not going to go through all these for now. Thank you for everyone who volunteered and spoke. I'm going to briefly... should I go into a difference between horror and thriller? I guess I will, because I mentioned I would do a little more on horror specifically, but I'm not going to do all the slides. I will just touch on it, and then we're going to go into this building atmosphere activity, and then we will finish up with Open Lab. Okay, so just because I specialize in horror and thriller, we get these questions a lot. That what are the actual differences between them? And there's a lot of crossover, and fans do disagree, and writers disagree, and there's a lot of drawing the lines in different places. Horror movies generally, though, are going to focus more on the scare, and the mood is going to be more oppressive, nihilistic, and just focus on frightening, as opposed to thriller, where the tone is going to be a little bit more frantic and urgent. It's still going to have that level of franticness and urgency to it, but it is not necessarily going to be about scaring the audience as much as it is keeping them on the edge of their seat. So we're going to focus more on suspense and chase and mystery, which is a very sort of more intellectual process than this feeling of like mystery is less asking questions and trying to learn the answers, as opposed to suspense, which is this leaning in, grabbing the armrest kind of thing where we're invested and engaged, and we are at that intersection of hope and dread, where we really hope one thing will happen and we really dread that a different thing will happen. So thrillers usually revolve less around the supernatural. That's not always true. There are supernatural thrillers. There's some very famous, very good ones. But horror almost has the expectation of being supernatural, and mundane horror is more niche and rare, I would say. There is still mundane horror, too. Thrillers often revolve... The hook is usually going to be more the situation, whereas the hook in horror is more the threat. Sometimes the threat and the situation are the same thing. Something like Unhinged with Russell Crowe is a thriller, but that almost has that horror-ish vibe to it, because this unhinged guy at the center of it is kind of at the source of that situation. There's kind of a game element to thrillers where the audience is asked to kind of figure it out. So there's more of an element of we're along for the ride trying to solve the problem or the question alongside the cast. And also, this just is neither here nor there, but people don't respect horror that much, and if a horror movie does really well, or somebody who doesn't usually watch them ends up really liking one, they'll usually kind of reimagine it as a thriller. They'll be like, oh, I guess, that wasn't horror, because it wasn't disgusting, so that was obviously a thriller. So that's also where some of the confusion here comes from, I think. I won't talk about plot types, though. We're talking mood and tone and atmosphere today. Here's what John Carpenter tells us. There's two different stories in horror, internal and external. In external horror films, the evil comes from the outside, the other tribe, this thing in the darkness that we don't understand. Whereas internal is the human heart. We might imagine that... I'm actually going to not go on this slide first. Let's start with this slide. So we might imagine there's a lot of cliches and expectations within horror, just like within anything else. But the audience is almost especially genre aware with this, maybe because the genre's been broken open so many times and has a little bit more clearly codified tropes and expectations due to a real boom in these kinds of movies in the 70s through the 90s, I guess I would say. So it became really easy to see the things that they were doing again and again. The audience is very aware of those expectations. So it's going to work for us and it's going to work against us. You can use that to subvert what the audience thinks is going to happen if you play to those expectations. That's going to be the thing where it's like your character opens the medicine. It's always the medicine cabinet or the fridge, isn't it? And then they're getting something, and then the music gets louder and louder. Then they shut the medicine cabinet. There's nothing there. That was you playing on the audience expectation of how the genre normally works, and you can build that level of kind of meta awareness into your both the writing itself and like how much are you going to play on those expectations and tropes versus how much are you going to do your own thing. And also the characters have their own, of course, level of awareness of the, you can have a character that's like, oh, whoa, it's like in all the zombie movies. You can do that, but that sets a lighter tone for for the movie overall. Every time we're making choices that deliberately lower the stakes and distance the audience from seeing this as something really happening, we are lightening the tone, almost always. There are rare exceptions otherwise. So, some things that we can use to create tone and mood and atmosphere in horror are things like anticipation and dread. We know there's something scary out there, but you deliberately pace yourself, slow down, just show hints of it, one thing at a time. That sense of waiting is really key to anticipation and dread. So you can use that to make the audience lean in more. And, you know, they're covering their eyes with their hands, but if you just shock them right away, they didn't have a chance to go like this. We want them to be going like this. Oh no, don't open the door. And then they open the door, and finally, you get the big jump, but you can only really get that jump in that same way if you have a little patience. So patience is really key to understanding tone in horror and thriller. This idea of the unseen and things that you don't reveal right away. You don't always want to show the monster early on in the movie. Think of your Jaws or things like this. And by deliberately framing things out, not showing them or not revealing information, then you are inviting the audience to keep watching to find out more, and also keep watching to see how that plays out, or how is that eventually going to be revealed. Ideally, you want it to be your threat to be revealed in a big, memorable way. That idea of shock is also going to be key to banishing tone in horror and thriller too, because if you're always just anticipating and building dread but never leading up to the shock, then your audience will lose that. They're not going to be hiding behind their hands as much if they don't think you're actually going to boo them at the end of it. So you have to either trick them really well into thinking that you are going to boo them, or that you actually need to boo them a couple times. And that's where I think The Ring, the Gore Verbinski The Ring from 2003 is so masterfully sets its expectations early on of how the scares are going to work, because it does a little bit in the opening sequence of this whole character closes the fridge door, there's nothing behind it kind of thing. But it doesn't way overplay it. It doesn't overdo it. It's very subtle the way that at first it says, you expected a jump scare there, didn't you? Well, there wasn't one. And then a couple scenes later, everybody knows the scene I'm talking about now, when Rachel goes to the party and talks to her sister, and her sister's like, when I saw her face, we just, without any build-up at all, cut to a really scary girl with her soul sucked out, right? Flashback to last night when her mom finds the daughter with her soul removed by the ghost, right? It's probably the scariest part in the whole movie. And it has no build-up at all. It almost breaks the rule that there should be build-up before the big jump scare. So he manipulates your expectations based on other movies that have come before it, and uses that to create this kind of off-kilter tone where you don't know where the next scare is going to come from. Hereditary is a similar sort of thing, where it's like violating one of the key rules of this genre so early on makes you think, okay, what are they going to do next? What else is this storyteller or the story capable of? Corrupted and broken mundanity are also interesting tools to use in terms of horror, where you can create a sense of unease and this dread and tension by playing on things that we know how they should work, or normally they create one very clear specific feeling. Think of the music box. A music box is not scary necessarily, but if you hear it playing by itself in a dark warehouse where no person would normally be playing a music box, then it starts to raise questions. That feels eerie, right? Why is that happening? When your character gets home and the door is already open just a little bit, right? It's not exactly a jump scare, but it's enough of something that we are familiar with combined with something that has tweaked that just slightly, or something that has, I would say, corrupted that mundanity and used it against us. Here's some other things that we just expect to see in horror and that can do a lot towards creating the mood. So just by having certain subject matter in the story, I mean, the either violence or the promise of violence are pretty inherent to horror. If you don't have a monster or a villain that's going to either hurt or kill your characters, you have to really convince us that it's going to. Think of something like The Sixth Sense, where it does actually make them feel dangerous and scary, and they are hurting one of the characters at least. Even if the main character is never technically really in danger, it does effectively trick us into thinking that they will be dangerous. Scare sequences are going to be something you have to decide how specifically you want to play them. Are they going to be frequent and following that kind of expectations and patterns that we have come to anticipate? Or are you going to violate those rules and deliberately veer off course in such a way that you keep us off guard? That's just another really key thing to do. Like, a really effective horror will almost always break one key rule in the first act, or one assumption, I guess. It's not really a rule, it's just an assumption. Here's an assumption. You can't kill a kid character, right? So a movie doing that then very early on sets this idea of, oh, this tone is different than I thought it would be. I don't actually know what to expect. I'm now very on the edge of my seat. So there's just a couple ideas for you, specifically how they pertain to, how tone and mood and atmosphere pertain to horror and thriller. Okay, let's go into this little interactive bit on building atmosphere, and we're going to build out these scenes. You don't have to actually write the full thing out and then paste it in, but you can maybe think of the order of details that you would reveal, and what is the first thing we say versus the second thing we say. Like, think very clearly on what is the camera doing. And this is going to kind of come back to a little bit more of an advanced screenwriting topic that, if you're new at this, don't really worry about this yet. You should kind of just be working on fundamentals. But this idea of different things in a scene commanding attention in a different priority. So the first thing that our eye kind of goes to should be the first thing that you write. So usually we will, if there's not a clear subject in the scene, we will start with a sort of overall picture of the whole thing. So my first sentence in describing this scene, I'm just going to start you guys off. A bonfire casts the snowy woods in flickering crimson. That would be my first sentence here. So I picked my subject, the bonfire, even though it's not directly in the frame, because you have to have a subject. Our sentences are almost always going subject, verbs, direct object. A bonfire, cast the woods in flickering crimson is going to be the, we have a little bit more. We have an adjective in there. We have a little bit of decorating the language, but not that much. It's pretty much just the bare facts, right? So you pick your subject carefully, and then you use that to build out the overall picture of what we're seeing. And then think, from there, what is the camera actually doing? Are we holding still? Because then you have to imagine, what would the eye kind of go to? You could maybe list the acts last if it's just a still shot, but if we're following the footprints on the ground, then tilting up to reveal the acts, that would create a completely different feeling of what's going to happen, or like a different emotion in the viewer, right? So you have to ask this question: what demands attention in descending order of importance? If the camera's moving, then you have to ask, what are we emphasizing? What is drawing our attention? And what are we specifically being asked to look at and focus on as the focal point of the shots? Okay. Any volunteers who think that they're a little bit more advanced in screenwriting and maybe have a little experience? Somebody who hasn't spoken yet, ideally? I'm just asking for a volunteer right now, is the question. Merrickson? Nacho? Any hands? Dan? Frosty, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi. All right, so you ready to try this out? We can, I have a few other scenes that you can look at. You can pick your favorite.
I will try my best.
All right. So we've got this one here, and on the side I have a couple things to maybe focus or pay attention to. We have this one, and then I think I have one more. Yeah, the cat's playing the instruments. What do you think?
Let's go with the cats.
Okay, so let's go back to the questions that we're asking, which is the order of things that we reveal. Or think of always, like, what is the camera doing to begin with, so that tells us what's in the frame. This is a pretty wide shot, but you can decide for yourself if the camera would be moving or not. What is the first sentence that you would write here? It doesn't have to be perfect, so don't worry about getting just right.
I think I would go with oh man, I'm terrible at this. But I would probably say like a group of cats. Am I saying like if the camera is moving, or just describing what I'm seeing?
Well, you're doing both at once. That's why it's kind of tricky, right? But
Oh,
yes,
okay.
start with a group of cats. We would maybe call them a band.
Yeah,
Okay, and what are they doing?
a group of cats are attempting to use instruments that they seem unfamiliar with. Like the cat that is playing the cello looks like he knows what he's doing, but the one that is under the drum seems to fumble a bit.
Okay, that's true, but that's a little bit more details or focusing on individual characters. So let's start with just the overall picture. What would you say is happening in the picture?
It'd be a group of cats having fun, dancing around.
But having fun doesn't tell us what they're doing. They're playing instruments, right?
Yes.
Okay, so a group of cats plays instruments in a snowy field. Would you say that sounds right?
Yes.
Okay, now we can get more specific. So what would you write next?
Group of cats playing in a snowy field. During a sunny day or cloudy day.
Okay, we could include that in the first sentence as well, probably, if we wanted to. So you're just trying to describe the scene. You mentioned that some of them seem like they are more competent than others. That would kind of imply that you are those close-ups of those cats?
Yes.
Okay, so which one would you want to focus on first? Go ahead.
I would focus on. My eyes keep drawing to the cat in the middle with the cello, and if I was moving the camera, I would go from the probably close up to a medium shot of the cello, the cat playing the cello, to next to the tuba, to the cat that's laughing next to the tuba, and then the cat that is underneath the drum.
Oh, okay, so you would do a series of close-up shots.
Yes.
You would. Okay, great. So yeah, you can totally do that. So start with the overall picture, but then as you give us those individual sort of close-ups, you imagine that we've moved in now, and now we're focusing on just one at a time. So if we start with a band of cats jubilantly plays instruments in a snowy field, and then your next sentence was the leader, Trixie, kills a solo on the cello. Maybe that's your next line. Then maybe your line after that is, what was the other one? You wanted to do the trombone guy?
Yes, the tuba player, Lyle.
Okay, yep. You could, if we're doing a close up on that other next character, we could say, rotund Bigby bleats out a steady rhythm on the tuba, and then your next one was that the one getting stepped on. I think he's dropping his drum set there.
The next one I thought would be good is the one that's kind of like laughing. So imagine him laughing at something that the tuba player had done.
Oh, okay, yeah. So if
then
you
switching to the cat under the drum.
Great. Okay, so you would do a shot first of the one in the top left that's laughing at the antics of the gang, and then the last one would be. And if you were going to do a series of shots like this, you might even put hyphens or dashes in front of each of them to sort of just additionally suggest that in each shot the camera is picked up and is essentially moved to another spot. When you do those little dashes, that makes it look like a series of shots, like a rapid succession of shots.
Okay.
And what would you say is the emotion that characters are feeling here and that the audience would be kind of feeling here?
Joy?
Yeah, I would say the cats seem pretty joyful. The one on the right's throwing snowballs. They're smiling.
It looks like they are having a celebration of some sort, and this is them just winding down at the end of the day.
Yeah, this looks like a jamboree, if I've ever seen one. So
that is the word I was looking for earlier. I couldn't.
Yeah, something about this.
I was actually saying.
It just screams jamboree. I can't explain.
It reminds me of the Aristocats.
Oh yeah, definitely. Although even in that one, I think they stand on 4 legs, not 2. Or do they? Do they walk on 2 legs in that?
Sometimes.
They can. Okay. These look like little people, though. I mean, they're wearing some of them are wearing clothes and little scarves and stuff. So, in any case, these are like anthropomorphic style cats. Thank you for this for participating in this. Do you want to do one more, or do you want to cede the floor?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for volunteering. Anybody else want to do one more? Luke. All right, do it, Luke. Which one do you want to do?
Scroll through them slower. Just one more time. So let's do either the ice skating one or what's the one before it? I would over describe that one. Let's do the ice skating one.
This one is especially tricky because I just want to weigh in. This is a rare example of I/E, which is interior/exterior. You almost never need to use that except if your shot looks like this. And we are literally inside one structure looking at something important that is being framed outside of that structure, or the opposite. Okay, ice skating. So my specific objective for you in this one is try to build a specific sense of voice. Think, what opinion does the text have on the scene?
In screenplay form? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do I just pick one?
Well,
There's too many to pick from.
Let's pick a subject to begin with. The subject does not have to be one of the people.
Pick any subject.
Well, yeah, your sentence has to start with, or has to have a subject, so you got to start with something.
Oh well, I mean, the opening image would be the I don't know, castle, for lack of a better word, the house,
Okay.
the structure.
Sure, you can start with that.
Building.
Go ahead.
So let's say he hates it. The point of view is like, this thing is a bad place.
Okay.
So it'd be like exterior. What even is this place?
Lakeside, riverbank.
Let's say. Sure. Let's go with that. Yeah. Exterior. I mean, we could say frozen lakeside, frozen riverside, whatever it is.
Sure.
I don't know. Path. I don't know. We would probably have like a place name. Anyway, it's not that important. Whatever the slug line is, the next thing would be, like, you know, I would probably describe sort of the facade of the building, like, you know, hateful red bricks rose from the frozen ground, you know, spitefully, something like that, if I was trying to add voice to it. And then I would zoom out and talk about, like, you know, snow clung to the trees and riverbank, like, you know, ash clings to the side of the fire pit, or so, I don't know, just whatever it is, whatever analogy that the character hates.
Okay, that could work.
And then I would describe, like, you know, the little people, you know, stupid peasants went about their, you know, tawdry business, you know, on horseback or on ice skate. I'm writing it in novel format now.
Yeah,
okay.
so
it would be present tense.
Right. We might say something like, you know, a brainless peasant staggers by on the ice, embarrassing himself. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So each one could be an individual. Yeah, like the trees. We start with the house, the trees, the water, and then each individual character in the shot could be like a story. The ice skater, you know, stumbles. The you know, an oafish boar on horseback, you know, or I don't know, the horse takes a dump in the middle of the street, you know, filthy. I don't know, just focusing on all the things that the character finds detestable about the setting.
Sure. Yeah, and so I think the premise of your initial line was a good approach. So to build out the entire picture of this, let's use the house as your first subject. And you were saying the main character does not like the inhabitant of this house, so in this case we could say something like, you know, the crumbling brick building looms over the landscape, or the crumbling brick house looms over the landscape like a vampire castle, or something like that. You can always use that sense of simile and metaphor, which you mentioned, to help build out that idea of voice, and how it would. That's also informing the director. How would they light the scene? How would they shoot it exactly? From what angle are they going to pick? Like, it's not just that we're doing this to add flavor to the text. We're doing this so they know how to present it on screen.
Right, because I could film this building and make it look inviting, or I could film it and make it look imposing.
Mm-hmm. And with the ice skater as well, you could say, like, you know, he effortlessly glides across the lake, or you could say he embarrasses himself on the lake.
I mean, it really is an inviting image. I was trying to pick a tone that didn't quite match.
Yeah, that's fine. Just for illustrative purposes, that's a good idea. What makes it actually an inviting image, though, just out of curiosity?
It's got a little bit of warm pastel hues to it. The composition's open and sort of like pulling you into the building, if that makes sense. Pulling you like forward into the image.
Yeah, something about it feels sort of carefree to me.
Yeah, it's light. It's you know, the figures kind of are moving. There's a sense of motion, even with the water being frozen. It's sort of, I don't know. I like it.
It feels so crisp and clear and clean.
Very impressionistic. It feels tinged with blood. That's probably just the history of the setting itself.
Were you saying that, or is that a comment from the chat?
That's what Mario says. It feels tinged with blood.
Might be.
Yeah, there's
saying a little more.
There's
about
some really nice like peach like hue like in the snow and in the building, and I could see why he's saying it looks tinged with blood.
Okay, yeah, and in describing it, if you wrote it out that way, people would probably paint a very different picture just based on that your action lines, you know. Okay, let's move on to. Thank you, Luke, for doing one of these.
You're welcome.
Hopefully, we're starting to see like all the different things that can add up to create tone and atmosphere and mood. It's not just one thing. It's the visuals. It's what's allowed in the world. It's the level of stakes and urgency. All of these things together, everything we talked about today, are going to sum up to create that overall feeling that your work gives off. It's like it's weird to try to quantify feelings, but we do have to break it down into just individual elements that can contribute to that feeling. It's not a math equation. There's not like one answer or one way of approaching this, but hopefully you guys have a bit of a clearer idea of how it works after today. Let's go into open lab time. So for the last 10 minutes, you can ask whatever you want about this topic or about your own projects, ideally related to this idea of tone, atmosphere, and mood. What have you guys got? Question from TJ, go ahead.
Hey, so I'm working like on a script for like something I wanted to work on for a while. It basically kind of like a murder mystery, but like not really, but like so basically that this teenager who pansexual who ultimately he lost like his like friends kind of quote friend who he asked out. And also he's like the main protagonist. He's kind of like a vampire, but a little bit.
Okay.
But like I kind of want to ultimately kind of make it like kind of funny, but like kind of funny, but like really miss a whole bit of it. So how do I like best like approach it?
So you're asking how to approach the tone of your story and give it that kind of lighter comedic tone?
Yeah.
Okay, so you said he's a vampire?
He is, but like he doesn't know until like a little bit later, and until like somebody calls him and like he tells him like he is.
Okay, so the idea of a vampire in a murder mystery is kind of a new and interesting idea that has a lot of potential for comedy, I think. I would look at the specific ways that a vampire could approach that situation and the limitations that they would face in trying to solve the mystery, too. It's the kind of thing where, like, the vampire goes to the crime scene. There's some blood on the crime scene. They're desperately trying not to look at it and desperately trying to not go, drink it as other people are, the cops are going over the scene looking for evidence. I would look for the ways that uniquely being a vampire could lead to trouble for your character and could lead to these sort of comedic situations where his limitations or his weaknesses as a vampire would get in the way and make complications for him. That could lead to a lot of humorous moments, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Hope that helps. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
We love a good vampire character. Go ahead, Marison.
Ooh, does my question have to be about tone?
No, you can ask about whatever you want.
Okay, I'm gonna ask about tone then, I guess.
Okay.
So you know how there are many crossovers with horror scripts and horror movies.
Crossovers like Freddy versus Jason?
No, I meant in the lecture earlier, you were saying how there's action horror, there's sci-fi horror, there's horror comedy.
Okay, you mean genre mashups, yeah. Or hybrids.
Yeah, I think an issue that I'm having with my recent gotten feedback saying like, that there's too many characters who have their quips. You know what I mean? Like there's too many characters who have to say something snarky and stuff, and it kind of makes it feel more comedic. And I guess I intended for some comedy, but not too much. So is there a way to, I don't know, to lessen that or to sort of bring some seriousness into the scenes?
Sure, you said it's a horror comedy?
No, no, it's not meant to be a comedy. It's supposed to be more just
Oh, it's just straight horror.
but
That was coming
you know,
off as two
yeah,
things.
but with some obviously with some comic relief. But I'm thinking now there's way too many characters who are too snarky and have to say something like,
I see.
you know,
Okay, so are the characters that fill the story the type of people that just do that all the time? Like, are they sort of like class clowns or teenagers or people like that are always doing that? Or do you feel it's coming, maybe it feels inorganic because it's coming from the type of person that just wouldn't normally make quips about anything, let alone a life or death situation? So let me just ask about the cast. Go ahead.
yeah. So if you've seen Arachnophobia, I kind of modeled a lot of the characters after that kind of town. But even then, like rewatching Arachnophobia, there's not too many characters who are like, just spitting one-liners and things like that. So
Right.
I guess it's just a matter of editing it later.
Well, sure. That's that's the method that you could use to approach that. Definitely, I would say if your characters are being sort of too witty, too quippy, and they always have the perfect response, I would consider first of all, do they have to say anything at all? So just by cutting lines, you could always reduce that effect of the characters always coming in at the last second with a joke. So if they say nothing and simply have an emotional reaction to something, maybe that could supplant a few of those moments and make them work better. What else can you do? You could increase the if it feels like there's always room for someone to say something. Maybe the moments aren't emotional enough. Maybe you aren't really hitting them hard enough with what's happening in the scenes, or they aren't being affected enough by what's happening. So maybe you could actually increase whatever I assumed horrific things are happening to them, right?
Yeah.
Then in that case, are they being affected drastically enough by those things? I would double check and make sure. Are you traumatizing these poor people enough?
Oh, okay, that's a good question.
Because if you were
traumatized
right. enough by something horrible, you wouldn't even
scary. They should be actually scared.
Yeah, you wouldn't even think to make a joke if something horrible enough happened, right?
Right.
So it could be that the scares themselves just aren't dark enough, or aren't forcing your characters to respond. They aren't visceral enough. They're not like forcing your characters to live in the moment. If they ever have the breathing room to step back and say, "Woof, takes one to know one," or what is it? He's right behind me, isn't he? That sort of like clammy kind of quippy joke. Then you maybe haven't set a dark enough tone for the entire story. I would maybe go back towards some of those opening couple scenes and find like the first instance of that and tone it back a little bit and make sure that the characters are being like emotionally affected the way that you need them to be.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the input, Connor.
No problem. Thanks for the great question. Almost always, if the tone is feeling off for the entire thing, the answers are in your first act. And the answers are in those first couple, you can't always just fix the first couple scenes and fix the tone, but usually the seeds of those problems are in the first act.
Okay. All right, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the questions. Luke, go ahead.
I don't want to take up too much time because Dakota and Nacho and everyone have questions.
That's okay.
But in horror, there's emotional reactions to like the scary thing without dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
How do you write his eyes widened, in response to the horror? Like, how do you make it better than that? Like, just some just simple, quick emotional reaction that, I don't know, it isn't the same, it doesn't repeat, it's not cliche, it cuts right to the heart of the thing. Like, how do you make it, do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I think so. So how do you show characters' emotional response to things without being repetitive?
Sort of like, yeah, I mean, that's really it. So, yeah, I mean, when they see something scary, besides they scream, besides how many different, I feel like there's only so many reactions.
Well, you'd be surprised.
How do you make those entertaining?
Right. Well, there's quite a lot of different responses that people have to being afraid. So I first of all think of fight versus flight, which is just going to be the center cornerstone of this. So which direction? And it's like fight, flight, or freeze. Actually, aren't those the first three? Or aren't those that's the
fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
Fawn.
That's
okay.
The fourth one.
There's another one too. Often in horror movie scenarios, people won't go with fawning unless the source of the threat is like their loved one or something like that. But it can it could still happen. So there's four options right there. There's four just basic options right there. But within those, you can get even more nuanced, can't you? Like, think of how it could just be that you haven't thought more carefully about how your character, how the people in that story would react to being afraid of those things. You may have one character that when they get scared, they get really like on edge and get really violent, right? They're the one that's always reaching for the gun. Like they hear a noise at night, they go for the gun right away. And then that allows you, by building that specific expectation of this is how this person normally acts. At some point, he's so scared his hand just shakes as it approaches the gun. You can use that later again and evolve it or push it forward with him, right? So I would use that to avoid doing the same reaction multiple times with the same character because the character is not responding the same way multiple times. That idea of the sense of progress and change is going to persist through scare sequences as your character either gets more afraid of the bad thing or less afraid of the bad thing. It could even be by the end, they're not freezing at all. What is it at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street? We're turning the tables on Freddy Krueger. And when he pops out for a jump scare, your character doesn't scream. They don't even look afraid. They get angry. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of ways that people can react to this. It's so much more than just eyes widening or screaming or things like that. Think of body language, the way that you withdraw a couple steps. Think of the way that your character might shake or tremble or faint or think of what they might say to try to placate the killer or whatever it is, right? So I guess there's, I'm sort of just saying it requires a little more creativity and thinking as to just a little more thinking as to things like human nature, right? Like, what are the many different ways that people can react beyond just the first assumption? And you sometimes run into this in things like weepy dramas too sometimes, right? How many ways can you write they embrace while sobbing? But you have to find the nuance in those specific moments, I would say. So like think of what is the actual dynamic shift that's happening there with the characters. He falls into her arms and surrenders to her. Do you see what I mean? Like that's like a completely different way of saying they embrace sobbing, but with a connotation to it.
Okay, I see what you mean, and I took up all the time, so maybe have time for one more.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do one more. Thank you for the great question. But yeah, look more into the specific nuances of those moments and dig a little deeper into human nature to find, I guess, just the diverse array of reactions that humans have to different stimuli. Complicated answer, but great question. I want to dig into that one more later. Mario mentions, the deaths in Saving Private Ryan. Each of them goes differently. Very true. Great point. So I think we don't have time to do more hands at the moment. Thank you so much for volunteering, everybody. I'll just take one more text comment because I think there were a few questions in the text. Let me just scroll up. Okay, I see a question from Dakota about melodrama, a question from Nacho about horror and comedy. We've been talking horror enough, so I think we won't do the horror question. I'll take the melodrama one. Okay, when does something become melodrama or how to avoid melodrama? So melodrama is when you play up the emotions of the scene to the extent that they no longer feel believable because they're too over the top or they're always at level 10 out of 10. So almost always this is going to be because you've been hitting too high, you've been hitting us with level 10 emotions for too consistent of a time in the story. So I think it's going to come down to things like pacing and emotionally weighting different scenes so as to feel like we are going, it's like playing a song, right? We or it has like a rhythm, an emotional rhythm to a story. If every scene is the saddest possible thing, then we have nowhere to go. We have nothing to build to. So you may have not given your characters enough room to breathe and build. And again, we have to gotta go back to your first act and avoiding. Of course, you can have melodramatic scenes in your first act. That's possible. But chances are, if you have melodramatic scenes later, you haven't given the character enough room to grow up to that 10. Like, you haven't given them enough markers of progress as they increase the emotion as they're, I don't know, getting more and more depressed over the story. They can't be 10 out of 10 depressed in every scene. But you may have to give them more of that breathing room and development space for them to eventually emotionally reach that benchmark that you're trying to get them to. So chances are it's going to come down to that. And therefore, and also just, of course, pulling back on some of the big displays of emotion. Not every time can you, fall into sobs, or not every time can you stare out the window and sing your heart out, because we're not always in a musical. We're not always in a tragedy. We can't always have your character have a big speech where they tie everything together and everyone claps at the end, and then they get lifted on everyone's shoulders and everyone's cheering for them, and then they embrace and kiss the love of their life. We can't always do those big over-the-top moments either. So I think it's going to come down to a couple things. One, that space for your characters to grow and work their way up to the emotional moments. So the sort of emotional breathing space, as I would call it. And it's going to come down to toning down big gestures and what we would call more theatrical displays of emotion. So it might require you to force your characters to have more quiet or internal. Like, we don't usually like to use these terms like internal in screenwriting because it's so hard to show internal things, but I would use smaller ways of indicating the character emotions rather than falling into sobs. Your character, they smile at the end of a scene, but it fades away just a second before you thought it would, and then we cut to a scene of them in the car as they drive away, and they're just staring out the window as happy music plays on the radio, right? So I would look for smaller displays of emotion and, give them enough room to get where they need to go. Hope that helps. Great question, again, with the melodrama. And awesome questions from everyone today. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming by to this class. Just to remind you what we have coming up. First of all, you should subscribe to Script Camp if you want to get access to all these classes, workshops, events, and boot camps, as well as we do have some more free ones coming up, like next week on Victory Lab, fun third act tricks. Then we have pilots on the 7th and week 1 of pilot on the 13th. So we have overview and then week 1. Those are free and open for everybody. We have Write a Movie in 8 Weeks, the new session of Feature Boot Camp starting Sundays 10 to noon on the 14th. And then you can see it tomorrow. We have a free novel writing class on scenes and chapters from 12 to 2. Okay, that's just a little preview. Again, if you are interested in those things, you can look in the chat and you'll see a poll with a bunch of blue numbers you can click on to indicate you're interested in any of these programs, or if you have a question about any of them. We're so glad to have all you guys with us here today. We will wrap up there, but we hope to see you soon in your next class, workshop, or events. Have a great rest of your weekend, guys. And for boot campers, I will see you guys tomorrow.